Hello and welcome to the latest EOA Virtual Network Meeting. My name is Oliver Smith. I'm the Head of Membership at the EOA. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this latest session in our suite of virtual meetings in which we like to share stories and case studies of various different businesses, focusing around general employee ownership, but also looking at some specifics around governance, employee engagement and communications, and in today's case, around leadership. So very shortly, I'm going to be delighted to introduce you to from the team from KCA Training, who are going to share in their insights and their experiences as they became employee owned and what life has been like since and their approach to making the most of being employee owned. Before I do, it's great to be back virtually, but we were in person last week at ARUP, kindly hosted by ARUP and sponsored by RM2. It was great to see about 130 people there. Got some thumbs up coming. Appreciate that interactivity, everybody. It must have been a good event. Thank you. And we've got great media coverage that hopefully many of you will have seen around the future of John Lewis, which is naturally of interest to everybody at the moment. But it was great to put employee ownership again on a national pedestal when it comes to the media content created. So what's going to happen next? Next slide, I'm going to provide a bit of an update for you as to what is happening with the employee ownership, what's happening in the sector, and how you can get involved. So fast approaching is EO Day. For those that do not know what EO Day is, it's a national celebration of employee ownership. It's an opportunity to do exactly that for you. Celebrate what employee ownership means. The theme of EO Day is, as you can see, hashtag the EO effect. What's been the effect on you as an individual, on your colleagues, on the business, on your local community? What's been the effect of employee ownership? Translate that into something, tell your story in some capacity. We've got some excellent resources on our webpage and ideas on what you can do, including invite your MP down to your offices if you can. Kindly sponsored by Postlethwaite. It's an opportunity to celebrate employee ownership. It's a week on Friday. There's not much time left. But if you haven't got anything planned, think about something you can do in order to celebrate EO Day. We've got lots of ideas. The next slide that we've got tells you a little bit more about our EO Learn courses. So EO Learn is a training package for people that don't know. It's a program of courses that are relevant and bespoke to employee ownership in the sector. So as you can see, the next one on the 3rd to the 7th of July is specifically for individuals who wish to be or who are employee directors or trustees. It's a full week, half day, online course, and at the end of that, you come out with a really comprehensive understanding about the role and the responsibilities. Next one that we do is representing and developing employee voice. If you're going to be employee owned, you need to listen to the employee voice. This is a 2 half-day, again, online course that enables that to happen and gives you some really great ideas as to what you can do to take back to your own business, to listen to that voice and also respond to it, which is equally important. And finally, we have an empowering leadership course within EOB. We're going to talk about leadership really soon, and it demonstrates the impact, relevance, and importance of a leadership style. This course provides an online tool called a growth mindset tool. You want leaders in your business to have that growth mindset, to focus around employee ownership, and they really enhance the skills and the abilities of the team. And that's what you want from your leader, and that course enables that to happen. We've got more courses being added to the EO Learn program in the future. But go on the website, have a good look, and see what's relevant and is relevant to your colleagues, especially if you're in an HR role. And final slide from me is about what's happening next with our events program. So we're doing this, but also we have really, for the first time this year, EO policy roundtables that are coming up. EO, as I've mentioned, is in the media. That was related to John Lewis, but EO is certainly in the media when it comes to consultation from the government. There's a specific interest in the EOT model, and as the representative body of employee ownership in the UK, we're keen to hear your views and your insights and also expertise if you are advisors. So there are 3 online policy roundtables happening this month and next month for you to book and get involved in. And it's back, the UK Employee Ownership Awards 2023. You can see there the 4 categories that are going to be part of the awards. I'd challenge you all to think, could we be within one of those or more of one of those categories? It's about the business, but also there's an opportunity for the employee owner of the year. Look at the criteria and think if your organisation or colleagues could be involved. We'll celebrate that at the conference in the Monday evening during the gala dinner. Next in-person event, 20th of September, very kindly sponsored by PwC, and it's in Manchester. We'll be doing this, but in person. You can book to attend, and I'd encourage you to do it. And our final event of the year is the showcase highlight signature event for the sector, and that's the EOA annual conference, very kindly sponsored again by Baxendale Employee Ownership. 2 days at the ACC in Liverpool, you can just immerse yourself in everything employee owned. Bookings available on the website. Our early bird tickets have now unfortunately all gone, but please do book your place, and there also are some exhibition stands still available. So that's me whizzing through what the EOA is doing and your opportunity to get involved. I'm now going to bring us to our actual presentation for today. So, as I mentioned, the theme around this presentation is leadership. We're going to hear from the team at KCA Training, various members of the team there, Rich, Rachel, and David, and they're going to share with us their insights on why they became employee-owned and the reasons and what it meant to them, but also since they became 100% EO in September 2021, what they've done to make the most of it. So if I could ask colleagues to come to the stage to say hello, I will then be able to hand over the reins for them to share their story. So, Rich, I believe I'm handing over to you first.
You are. Thank you, Ollie, and very good morning to you all. So firstly, we'll just do a few introductions before we dive into the presentation. So my name is Richard Holmes. I'm Managing Director of KCA. And my two colleagues who are going to present with me are Dave and Rach. It should be said about 5 minutes before this started, Rach was invaded by a bumblebee. So she was frantically flapping on camera to try and get the bumblebee out of the room. And I'm pleased to say that the bumblebee didn't win that battle. But Rach, if you'd like to go first and just introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Just to say I didn't kill the bumblebee. I just ushered him outside. Anyway, I'm Rachel Burgess, and I'm a project coordinator and finance officer at KCA Training, and I've been here for 6 years.
Thanks, Rach.
Dave?
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Robinson. I'm a partnership development manager for KCA, so working with our clients.
Thanks, Dave. And ideally, we would have wanted Tom to come and present with us. And Tom is one of our he's one of our co-founders and also one of the original shareholders of KCA. And you'll hear later on in the story this morning about how part of our story is about family. And unfortunately, Tom lost his wife 5 years ago. And today is the anniversary of his wife's passing. So he felt the need to spend time with his children and his family. But that will feature within our story as we share where we started and where we are now. So allow me to share my screen. I'm going to bring a presentation up so you guys can hear a little bit more about where we've come from and where we're going. So our story starts with Kate and Brian. Kate was a social worker and Brian was a teacher. And like many young couples, they wanted to start a family. And they had 3 children, one of whom was Tom, who I just mentioned. The thing is that Kate and Brian wanted to make a difference to the lives of other young people as well. So they decided to foster. So not just one child, though. They gave permanency to 12 children. So there were 15 in total, and their family home became a children's home. So as you can imagine, like all humans, these young people had their own stories about how they arrived with Kate and Brian and the family. And together they learned a lot about how to celebrate successes together, but also how to navigate some of those difficult moments in life as well. And Kate and Brian and the family learned a lot about attachment. And attachment is about those early relationships that you form with your parents or the significant adults in your life. And they also learned about trauma. And trauma is when we go through things that are overwhelming or stressful. And of course, resilience as well, when we come through the other side of those stressful and traumatic experiences. So Kate and Brian and the family learned about how we recover from trauma, especially the importance of the relationships with those significant people in our lives. Those people who can act with care and compassion and give us the support and regulation that we need when we feel like we're struggling. Their experiences took the family on a journey to understand the neuroscience of trauma and how that affects our behaviour and how it affects our relationships. This knowledge base has a profound implication for how people in the social sector work with children and young people and any vulnerable person. So whether you're a teacher or whether you're a social worker, a probation officer, or anyone that's in a caring profession, or even in the organisations that you're in today, the neuroscience helps us to understand why we behave in the way that we behave and what we can do about it. So let me tell you a little bit more about the story of how Kate and Brian started KCA. And I'm going to pass over to Dave now, because Dave was one of the, well, in fact, I think, Dave, you were the first employee of KCA.
I was, Rich, and yeah, back in the day, it was basically me and the family there. God, it's 12 years ago now. So many years on from starting that family, Kate and Brian wanted to share this knowledge that they knew could transform the lives of others. And as a family, they started to think about how they could set up a training and consultancy business that shared this knowledge base and made enough money to support a core group. So KCA was established in 2011, started out in the garden office, as many startups do, and gradually built up a small team. So I was the first to come in, and I think within sort of 12 months, we had another 3 people, and have gradually sort of been growing since then. We also built a small team of expert associates. Being a training company, we could deliver training from our sort of own expertise in-house, but also through Kate and Brian's connections, we had access to a whole range of experts around the country. So whilst being quite a small company, we were able to operate on a nationwide basis. And of course, all those associates shared our passion around attachment trauma and resilience. And we started to develop training packages and selling them into the social care sector. Whilst the name above the door was Kate's, it was never just about Kate, but much more about how to get this transformative knowledge into the hands and minds of regular people, so it could transform their lives and work in the same way it impacted on the family. The organisation is now 12 years old, and although Kate does continue to work as a training consultant, the company name has changed to Knowledge Change Action. In terms of what we offer, we co-create learning journeys with our partners that help them understand the neuroscience of attachment trauma resilience. Our partners are most often social sector organisations like schools, health services, criminal justice organisations. We then deliver training to practitioners on these topics. Increasingly, we also support local authorities on larger scale system change projects as well.
That's great. Thank you, Dave. So that gives you a little bit of context as to where KCA originated from. And I want to talk now a little bit more about our journey into employee ownership and also our approach to leadership and management within the organisation. So as you can imagine, through the sort of work that we do, we often hear stories of how really, really talented and gifted people leave their roles. And they're often roles that they once loved. These are vocational roles, but they leave because of burnout, sometimes micromanagement, and sometimes just unnecessarily focusing on arbitrary KPIs. This made us think about how we could model a different way of being in an organisation, a different way of working, if you like, that was congruent with our trauma-informed values. And they're really around helping people to stay well and healthy, make enough money for people to sustain their family, and stay living in a community that they loved, whilst still making a difference to society. So there have been 3 key actions that we've done as an organisation that's helped us achieve that vision. And I say achieve because it's an ongoing process. It's working towards. So the first of those is becoming employee owned, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The second is being co-managed, and by that we're talking about being in a non-hierarchical organisation. So trying to achieve the flattest possible structure we can in a more networked way. And then the fourth is operating on a 4-day working week, which has been, I think, about 8 years now, but Rachel will talk about that in a moment. So
It looks like we might have lost Rich there, but he was asking me to talk about sort of the process for us to becoming employee owned. So let me just go to that bit there. It was about 6 years ago, and the board started to think about the company's long-term legacy. And the management team, led by Tom, who can't be with us today, was tasked to look at the options to help the company thrive in the long term. They had long wanted a model whereby the growing team felt like they had more influence and responsibility for the company's direction and momentum. The different options were explored, but when Tom discovered EOT, it was clear that was the direction of travel that could work for KCA. The company was in a good place to make a transfer of ownership, and there were constructive conversations with the team. But this process was stalled, as sadly, as Tom mentioned earlier, Tom's wife fell ill and lost her life. And as a single father of 5, Tom's priorities needed to be on his children. And as you can imagine, working in a company that understands the impact of trauma and attachment, we all knew as a family what was needed in that moment. So the company needs took a backseat. Whilst we continued to operate, the scale of the work decreased for a period of time. As family circumstances stabilised, we were able to start to regroup and grow again. KCA was undoubtedly affected by the pandemic, as many training organisations were. But we're in a pretty resilient place as we have a well-respected e-learning platform. And if ever there was a time for people to need to learn about trauma, it was during a global pandemic. As COVID retreated, the options of employee ownership were back on the table. So first thing we did was we recruited a new managing director, Rich, and started the process with Andrew Harrison, who is here on the call today. Andrew helped us through all aspects of the transfer, not just the legal bits, but also helping the team to understand what the transfer meant to everyone. And then by September 2021, we were able to make that transfer. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear anyone at the moment. Can you hear me if I'm speaking?
Hi, everybody. Just having some nice technical issues. It's absolutely fine. So, Rich, we're about to start on the bit about employee ownership. We lost you there for a second. Have you got your slides back in place and you're back off mute? Rich? Oh, Rich, we still can't hear you, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can't hear
you. David, do you mind leading from this point? Is that all right?
What, going right out?
From here?
Leading from this point?
Yes.
Yes, for sure. No, I can do that.
Fantastic. I'll hand over to you.
Because I talked about the process of becoming employee owned. Did that go out? Ollie?
So Dave, we were on slide 5.
Slide 5. Okay.
Okay.
I'll get onto that. So there were lots of reasons why we wanted to move to employee ownership, but a key driver for us was about social justice. We recognise that the reason KCA is so valued is because the people who work in the company are committed to its success and embody its values. They want to make an impact on the world, not just make money. But we are pragmatists and we recognise both are needed. We recognise that whilst today's economy has worked relatively well for many of us, it has worked best for the powerful few. Without question, things have got better since the 18th century, but playing field still tilts towards those who already have money and power, and those deep disparities continue today, which for many people and communities experiences trauma. We felt that to be true to our values. We needed to do our bit in levelling the playing field and helping people have a seat at the table. With an equitable share of the wealth, they help to create and a voice on what to do and how to do it. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, I think we're ready to move on to the next slide.
Okay, thanks then, Dave. So every week we work with teachers, social workers, probation officers, health professionals who share the challenges with their roles. It's not uncommon for those in caring professions to experience something called vicarious or secondary trauma. So when you work with people who may have experienced trauma, they're often affected by it themselves. But there's lots of things you can do to counter this, from providing good quality supervision to creating a culture where people are genuinely cared for. So as you might expect, we tried to practice what we preach. So we implemented a 4-day working week. We did actually implement this 8 years ago, so it's not necessarily new to us, but it's still considered to be relatively innovative. The purpose of this was to ensure that our team had time to recover from working with other people's trauma and have time to invest in their own relationships. So as we know that that's what aids the recovery process. It's also made us an attractive employer. So whilst our salaries are not the highest in the market, we do attract highly skilled people who want to be in an organisation that matches their personal values. There were some bumps in the road in our move to a 4-day week. Initially, the team took different days of the week off, but we found that approach stifled workflow. It made planning of training events and meetings more challenging. So the team agreed to shift to a new pattern, and Fridays were established as our non-working day. And this has been much, much better, although there are still some weeks where deadlines catch up on you, and we find ourselves very occasionally needing to work on a Friday. But it has to be noted that actually during this kind of period, when we moved to the 4-day working week, our revenue actually did increase. So that's just something just to add in there. I'll move on to this bit as well. So this is on to co-management. This is the newest bit of our change program that we're working on. It's the most exciting and challenging, but we feel is necessary to live our values. We called it co-management to emphasise our interdependence as a group of people working together, but some of the principles come from a wider movement that some call self-management. Others call it TEAL, as referenced by Frederick Laloux. Some call it holacracy. The name doesn't really matter to us, but it's more about developing a way of working that keeps people in adult-to-adult relationships and encourages more people in the organisation to take a shared responsibility for its success. Too often we get caught in parent-child relationships at work, and as a result, there can be unhelpful and unhealthy behaviour patterns. Our first step then was to invert our structure chart. So traditionally, organisations work in a top-down manner, often exerting power and decisions down through the team. However, we wanted to invert the traditional structure chart to show how leaders can use their strengths to be in service to the organisation, holding the team from the bottom up. So if we could just have the next slide, thank you.
Do you want me to take this one, Rach?
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Okay, so we in. Yeah, so this is what it looks like in practice for us with the EOT at the bottom. The inverted triangle is more important, it is more symbolic than it is a reflection of how we work. In practice, we work more in a networked way with small project teams coming together for commission projects. It would look like a lot of interrelated circles. This allows us to draw on each other's strengths and assets rather than being restricted by tightly defined roles.
So there are some core principles we've been exploring together. The first is wholeness, where a worker's self-awareness is more important than their professional persona. We have found that this gives permission for people to be authentic with each other. If there are issues at home, people feel safe enough to say what's happening without judgment. We have found this creates a culture of genuine support and care. It recognises us as human beings, not as cogs in a machine. This doesn't mean that everyone has to wear their heart on their sleeve each day, but what it does mean is that you don't have to wear a professional mask to work. This, of course, can mean that it is okay to be vulnerable at work, which for some people is unusual and can take some adjusting to. But often when one person reveals their human vulnerability, then it subconsciously gives permission for others to do it too. The nature of power hierarchies that we've all been exposed to is that all eyes are on the most senior person in the room. When it comes to wholeness, that is something as leaders we have to model. It's also important to recognise that the other side of our vulnerabilities are also our strengths. So if we can learn about both, we can work to the best of our abilities. There is nothing like someone saying, I need you for this task because you're really good at X. So to make someone feel wanted, and it creates a sense of belonging within a team. When we wanted to review our appraisal approach, we invited those colleagues who had the most difficult relationship with appraisals from previous jobs. In my previous job, for example, I was with a local authority, and as Rich kind of touched on before about our appraisals were really kind of directed at what the KPIs were for the business. But it didn't actually talk about what we needed as individuals. So what we've done is we've co-designed a new process that safely facilitates feedback. So peer feedback is now included within our appraisals. Shall I hand back to you, Dave?
Yeah. Another principle is evolutionary purpose. This is in recognition that organizations change with the context they find themselves in. Our world is more complex and volatile than it's ever been, where very little stays stable for very long. Some call this a VUCA. Careful how I say that. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, a term coined by the US military in the 1980s. If there was ever a time that was VUCA, it's probably been the last 3 years. I know our business model and offer has changed multiple times in that period. We have to keep changing within that context. Through adapting our evolutionary purpose, it gives us permission to consider new alternatives and opportunities. We rely more on our compass values and principles than a map of a predetermined route. If metaphors help, consider it more like how saplings grow towards the sun in order to survive. Next slide, please. Finally, we are now learning about co-management practices. This includes complex issues like decision-making, who makes the decisions, how they are made, how the outcomes communicated. We are early on starting to practice consent-based decision-making, whereby those who are impacted by decision are included in the decision-making process. We've probably always done this to an extent, but it has been informal. We are now learning how to structure the process and make it more explicit, so that practice becomes embedded and sustained. This might not include a manager leader, so this one has to reflect on the process of letting go and not being in command and control. Of course, this means that power is intentionally being redistributed across the organization, so more people feel empowered in proposing changes that are in the company's best interests. The leaders aren't the only ones with the answers. We're also in the process of a salary review. We want to do this fairly and transparently, so we've pulled together a working party to review all roles across the organisation and apply a fair process to assess where KCA salaries sit against the market. Finally, we feel it's important as a co-owned organisation to be transparent about salary levels. After all, the employees are also the owners.
So, Dave, I think you can hear me again now.
Certainly can hear you.
So thanks very much for stepping in and doing the entire presentation. That's great. And that's what I guess a non-hierarchical organisation is all about. We did say that this kind of last slide here was about the last word, really. And I wrote in the slide deck to Dave, say something profound. But I think it's really your experience of coming through this journey from being a small family-owned startup to where we are now. I mean, what have you noticed about that journey?
Yeah, for sure. Well, exactly that. When we started out being that family owned, through that startup period and then, being a fledgling business, it felt right to sort of have that leadership there and that sort of tight control. And now, as we've gone through, as we've just sort of been talking before about, sort of the last 10, 11 years of the various ups and downs that we've had, and then to move into employee owned, it's, whilst I've always felt within a small company an important part of what was going on, now being in the employee owned place, you feel very much that sort of stakeholder and have that agency about where the company goes. And yeah, it feels really good.
And Rach, do you have any last thoughts about what that journey has been like? Because you've been with the organisation, for 8 years or so, 8 or 9 years?
Yeah, I think the biggest change, I think, for us is probably, that we were talking about the flat structure and moving away from relying on somebody kind of above you in your sort of line management to make those decisions, and actually trying to kind of understand the whole decision making process and seeing it kind of how it affects the whole organization and your colleagues. I think that's been, a learning journey, and we're still going through that. There's still learning that, but I think that's probably been the biggest thing for me.
That's great, thank you. And thank you for both modelling to step in to the presentation when something doesn't go right. It's about how you share those skills with each other and step in and support each other as a team. So if we bring Ollie back in now, because I think there may be some a Q&A session and some questions that we might want to hear from people. So, I mean, Ollie, what observations do you have apart from having a tech challenge within this presentation?
Oh, well, firstly, I've got to congratulate you for adapting to the technical challenge that nobody was expecting. So well done to you all, and almost a great demonstration, as you've alluded to, Rich. So thank you. So we've got some questions coming in to my right-hand side. So what I'll do is the best I can to answer all of those. You'll see from the features, guys, there's an upvote. So if you like a question, just upvote it. It'll come towards the top, and it comes to it's more prominent, and I'm more likely to ask the question. But I'm going to start with quite a general one, inverting the triangle. So if you were to go through that, I'm going to say process might sound like it's finished, because I can't, something like this isn't ever finished. If you're going to go through that again, what would you say to anybody, a bit of advice? Yes, that's definitely an approach to take in order for the behaviors to change, the messages to sink in, but also what might you do slightly differently?
I mean, for me, it's a philosophical shift more than anything else. And the inverting the triangle is more of a visual representation of it. But I guess for leaders, it's kind of seeing yourself as being in service to your organization, whereby you're using your strength and your power to hold up the organization. And I guess for us as in leadership roles, it's about going on that journey to see ourselves as being leaders that are in service rather than leaders that are using our power and influence to push down through the organization. So that is quite a personal thing. And I think for the team, it's kind of an ongoing process of realizing when we fall into parent-child relationships. And that happens in every organization, every setting, all the time. Someone will throw their toys out the pram because they're frustrated or they're not happy about something, and they'll put the blame on management. I guess the key for us is to keep pulling each other into adult-to-adult conversations about it. And that's not just the responsibility of those with more formal leadership roles within the organization, but it's everyone. So it might be that I'm having a bad day, and Rach might say to you, Rich, what's really going on today? There's something that's not quite right. So I think it's more about self-awareness and being able to take time to think about, how am I in this moment? But I mean, that's my perspective on it. I don't know whether Dave or Rach have a view on that.
No, I think you've summed it up fairly well there, Rich, to be honest. It's it does very, very much feel like that. Like you said, it is that inverted. It does feel symbolic. It's when I look around at the team now, you very much seeing your co-workers rather than any kind of lines of hierarchy in there. So yeah, it's all good.
I guess what I would say is it's for us, it's been it takes time. And I guess it's treating that process with kindness and compassion that help people get their heads around a different way of seeing the organisation or different expectations of each other. And I think probably we have taken time to do that. Could we have done it faster? Possibly, if we were more explicit about it. But I think we were also feeling our way through that to make sure that we had everyone on board and could see the benefit of it, but see the benefit particularly through the lens of our values, so that we could achieve congruence.
Sure. Okay.
Can I just add a little bit more in there? Sorry, around that sort of timing. And I think there was a real consciousness around what the company had been through in the last couple of years, obviously with the personal tragedy for the family, but then also the pandemic. It was about sort of waiting for that right time to bring it in, because people had felt a bit with all the instability of the last couple of years, just wanted to make sure that it came in at the right time for people to feel safe in that.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to the questions, just one final one for me that builds on that. How do you measure the impact of what you've done?
So I guess, we are still a company. We do still need to pay salaries. We do need to make profit at the end of the day. So there are some core basics there about having a viable company. So that's kind of one of the baseline measures. I guess there are other measures in terms of the quality of the service that we're offering, and we have a really, really high satisfaction rating with the clients and the partners that we work with. I mean, you can hear the tension in my language there. Even when I use the word client, I'm kind of going, well, what's that mean in terms of a power dynamic? So, I would say that those that we work with are partners within the commissioning process. And I guess, there is something here about staff well-being and being able to retain really great quality people. As Rach said earlier, our salaries are not the highest in the market, although we are about to go through a salary review. So we have to work really hard to be able to think about, well, what is the culture that people really want? How can we attract people and retain them? And in the main, we do retain a lot of our core staff, and we are growing our team, and people are attracted to working for KCA because of the values and the principles that we operate to. But I do also appreciate that that culture doesn't always work for everyone. So if you're someone that really needs command and control structures to keep yourself well and safe, this might not be the culture that you want to join. So in our recruitment process, we're increasingly becoming more and more explicit and proud of the culture that we're trying to create. So it's an interesting and delicate dynamic. But what I would just emphasize is we are a trading company. We do aim to make profit. And that is ultimately the bottom line, the same for many of the people on this call today.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to the questions that are coming in. If you could be succinct in the answers, that'd be great, so I can get through as many as possible. Thank you. So the first one is, how do you manage appraisal of colleagues in a flat/inverted structure?
Rach, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, so we've all worked quite together as a team on how we're going to do our appraisals, and we've come up with a process where we invite feedback from our peers and our colleagues, and it's a discussion based. It's not really there is a slight form that we fill in, but it's very much a discussion based. We do have line managers, but our line managers are more there for kind of the supervision and kind of staff wellbeing that we're looking at. They will do our supervision with us and our appraisals with us, but it's very much kind of getting a 360-degree feedback from all of our colleagues in the organisation, and it is really discussion focused rather than a tick box exercise, if you like.
And we did initially call it a 360 appraisal, but then we realised that language was quite triggering for some people and could be a little bit scary. So we changed the emphasis on it just to be much more about peer-to-peer relationships.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This one's for you, certainly, Rich. How does a managing director fit into a non-hierarchical structure? The
easiest way I can describe it is more around the leadership style being much more coaching than directive. So when we have issues, I will often say, I don't have the answers to this, but I can facilitate a conversation that helps us find a conclusion or an answer that is right for the company in that moment. So I would say that's more of the emphasis. It's much more on a coaching leadership style.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, I think this one's for you, but anybody please do comment. How do clients find you being available 4 days a week?
Quite envious, actually. So I think it's fair to say that if there's an organisation, we are a training company, if an organisation wants us to deliver on a Friday, then some of us will go in for a couple of hours and deliver training on a Friday if that's what our clients need. But actually, we found that because of what we do, Fridays are not the greatest day for us to deliver training because, those professionals that we're working with are tired on a Friday and not absorbing information. So we really haven't found that as an effect. And I think actually a lot of organisations appreciate the values that we've put in place to look after the well-being of our staff, and that sits at their own values, and they recognise that. So I think actually it's worked quite well.
I would also say we recognise it is much easier for a company that does consultancy and training to shift to that model than it is to an organisation that perhaps has shop frontage, for example, that relies on customers walking past every Friday. So there is some acceptance there that, you know, we're very fortunate in the modelling that we've got as a business.
Okay, thank you. And next question, David, just in terms of term, might be for yourself. Had you thought about dropping traditional job titles labels rather? Are you co-owners first, job title second?
There hasn't been, I would say there hasn't been any explicit discussion around doing something like that. Obviously, as we move to the sort of away from the hierarchical processes, that's certainly something we could look at as an option, I think. You know, we do want to have those job titles when we're going out, because we are obviously working with our partners and our commissioners. So you know, it's useful sometimes for people to have a title there. But yeah, no, we could have a look at that, I think, Rich. I think, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we are constrained by our job descriptions. So our job description is only as good as the day in which it's written. You know, we talked earlier about being in a VUCA environment, so changing context all the time. We as a company have to keep adapting to that changing context. As we change, what we need our team to do also changes. You know, there may be new technology that comes out that we've got to adapt to, or the baseline knowledge that we use changes because there's updates in the neuroscience. So, yeah, I think it's something that we all need to think about, is how do we create more fluidity with those roles in a way that benefits the organisation, but also helps, also people still feel safe and held. And I think there's a delicate balance in there. We will explore that sort of thing, but I don't think we have the answers for it yet.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Is being an employee-owned business a driver for how you work, your values and your culture, or is being an employee-owned business a result of these?
Oh, that is a really interesting question.
Well, I think it'd be fair to say that the process to moving towards employee-owned, you know, was a driver from the values that we had within the business beforehand, and how it was founded, how it was run. I think it became a sort of natural step for us to move onto. And, you know, as we work now, it continues to be, I would say, you know, the fact that we are there working as a team all the time, I think that very much sits with our values of what we're training as well.
Any additional comment?
I guess it comes back to those principles and those values. You know, every day we work with people who are brilliant teachers. Teaching is a really great example. Brilliant teachers, but if you've got a head teacher in that school who takes quite a dominant command and control approach, that person ends up switching off. So it is about how can you take more ownership and autonomy of the work that you do, and how do you build more trust? I guess becoming employee owned is a mechanism of doing that and modeling that, whilst keeping a good solid governance structure that it is, you know, where everyone is still held accountable. So I haven't really answered that very well, Ollie, but both.
You have done, Rich, to a degree, and as did David. I mean, what we typically see when businesses become employee-owned, those who are going to be successfully employee-owned are where it's a natural progression. If you go employee ownership is going off in a completely different direction as to where the business was heading, that's going to be far more challenging. So you already alluded to it in your presentation. It was a natural next step, and it was the right next step for the business. Rachel, probably come to you because we're on the 4-day working week again. How did you shift from 5 to 4 days? And does that therefore you work longer hours to make them up? We
actually all voted. So everybody had a vote. Did we want to go to four days a week and slightly our full-time equivalent is actually 32 hours a week, so I recognize that's probably a little bit lower than a lot of organizations. So we did shift to a slightly longer working day. So we now work 8 till 5. We all have an hour for lunch, so we all ensure that we take an hour for lunch because that's really important. But yeah, we did shift to a longer working day. But I do recognise that our longer day, 8 till 5, is probably the same as quite a few people anyway. So we are fortunate in that. But work-life balance has always been at the heart, because it was a family-run business right at the start, and that was, quite key to the work hours that everybody did anyway. So yeah, I recognise that that's probably not the answer that you probably wanted, but
Can I just add in there that originally we our working week was actually 35 hours, and it was as part of the process of moving to the 4-day working week where we said, okay, we'll reduce the full-time working hours down to 32 with the idea you do those over 4 days. So yeah, hence the 8-hour working day. We didn't have a 32-hour working week beforehand.
I think the other thing to remember here, Ollie, is that we're many of our team are parents, and for anyone that's on this call that is a parent, they'll know how challenging juggling work and being a parent is. And all the evidence, all the neuroscience just tells us the importance of parents having connected relationships with their kids. So if you are going to do that, and we're going to ensure that our children as a generation, as a nation, grow up feeling well balanced and well connected and cared for, then people need time to be able to do that. We don't live in a society that we might have done 50 odd years ago where communities were better placed to look after each other. That old adage of it takes a village to raise a child. We live much more independently now. And that's not necessarily helpful on child and adolescent mental health and well-being. And in fact, we're seeing that nationally with waiting lists for things like CAM services extended to up to 4 years in some places. And generally, child mental health is on the political agenda because it's not great. So I think, again, it comes back to living your values and being able to sustain that difference that we want to see in the next generation, and the sort of society that we want our children to grow up in, and the sort of society that we want to grow older in.
Thank you. Clearly a very people-centered business. So
absolutely.
And Rachel, the answer you give is the answer. So absolutely any answer we want is fine. Thank you. Just a couple more questions before we move on. So people can have a conversation with David, Rich, and Rachel on a networking table after this to dig a little bit deeper and scratch away a little bit more. Have you had situations in which a flat structure and consent-based decisions actually present a challenge?
Yeah, so I think there are, like any organization, sometimes you get into moments where you've got to have difficult conversations with people. And I think that's where, if one person wants to do something in a particular way, what the consent-based decision-making process is it allows that opportunity for someone to express an objection, but then help us find a solution to that objection. So I think if you're particularly, determined to push something through on a particular level, it's quite possible that somebody else will confront that if they feel that it's not in the best interest of the company. And when that happens, you've then got to figure out, so how do we repair this relationship? But again, it comes back to staying in adult to adult conversations with each other and not slipping into parent-child and, telling someone, well, you've got to do this. It doesn't work for long-term relationships, and it becomes unhealthy. And eventually, my personal belief is it ends up being toxic.
Thank you. And a structural question, because this one was asked when all of you booked. There was a number of questions that people put forward, and one of them was specifically about your structure and your voice, and asking if you have an employee council or representative body that captures that voice.
No, so we are quite small. There are 13 employees. We are in the process of growing and expanding the team, but we're relatively small. So we have one elected employee representative who sits on the EOT board. We have a board representative, which is myself, and I sit on the EOT board, and then we have an independent chair. So we are relatively small. What I would say is that we have a very close working culture. So employee voice is part of being a member of KCA. So we don't feel that we need to do anything in addition, but we do need to hold that value of being able to listen to each other and hear different perspectives.
Fantastic, thank you. So that concludes the Q&A section of today. So thank you, David, Rachel, Rich. Thank you for preparing the presentation. Thank you for talking through that. Thank you for asking my questions. And that continues. So what's going to now happen is we're going to move into our virtual networking lounge through the platform of AirMeet. And what we have, David, Rachel, and Rich will each have a table, so you can go and ask them more questions. And also you'll be joined by colleagues from the EOA who can explain a little bit more. And there's a table about the role, life after being an employee trustee. Once you've completed that tenure, what's going to happen next? Feel free to move around the tables. If you leave, nobody's going to be offended. That's absolutely fine. Plus, it's virtual, so you can get away with it quite well. So you're now going to move virtually automatically into the networking lounge, and then we'll come back together again before we finish at about 12:25. So think of your questions and start asking them. Thank you. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. For those of you who are able to stay, I hope you enjoyed the opportunity to ask Rich, David and Rachel some more questions, and also speak to Yogi about our learning courses that we have available to us. So I just want to thank the team at KCA for taking the time and the effort to contribute to that presentation and discussion. If you've got any further questions, I'm sure they won't mind being asked, but please, if you want to come to the EOA first, we'll look to facilitate an introduction to ask a few more questions and dig a little bit deeper. So as a wrap up, I want to do some reminders. We've obviously got the EO Learn training courses that you can see on the screen right now. Please do consider what opportunities they may lie for yourself and your team. As we've been talking about today, the KCA approach is very people-centric and people-driven. Providing opportunities for people to develop is obviously part and intrinsic of being an employee-owned organisation. So on to the next slide, which is now going to remind you about our upcoming events. We've got those policy roundtables, really, really important. The EO team model has been with us now for a number of years, since 2014. The government are opening a consultation on that later on in the year. We need to demonstrate the impact, relevance and value of the EO team model as it currently is, and look how it may be even enhanced in the future. We need your support in order to do that as the representative body. So please join us for those policy roundtables. The awards are up. Don't think you're not good enough for an award application. You probably are. Look at the eligibility criteria and encourage you to get involved. And we've got those two major events that are coming up later on in the year. In September in Manchester, and of course the conference in Liverpool at the end of November. So thank you very much to the KCA team once again. Thank you all for your contributions. Enjoy the sunshine, and we will see you again very soon. And make sure you've got plenty of plans for EO Day a week on Friday.